All right, well, welcome everyone to our event today on to-go alcohol and its impacts on drunk driving. We're going to explore that today. Just as a little bit of a introduction or overview for anyone that may not be familiar with R Street that's watching today. We're the R Street Institute. We are a free market think tank that is nonpartisan. We explore a lot of different issues, a lot of different topics, one of which is alcohol policy. We're the only national think tank that actually really dedicates a part of our research team to that issue. And we're excited here to have a good panel discussion today about some different issues again around to-go alcohol. And just before we start, I wanted to quickly mention we always welcome viewer questions. So if you guys have a burning question at any point throughout this, from now until the end, feel free to submit it to us. There's a Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. You just go ahead and type it into that. It'll submit it to me as the moderator, and then I will be able to be able to ask our panelists, depending on how many we have. We may not get to all of them, but feel free to submit away. We always like that. I'm going to quickly introduce who we have with us today before we kick it off. Again, talking about this topic, I think it's very important that we get the right stakeholders in the room to be able to do so. So we try to do that today. We have Chief Stephen Castevens, and he is a chief of police. And we also have Vincent Balistreri, who is a restaurant owner. And both of them have actually been on the front lines of this issue. And so we'll talk a little bit about some of the research we've done at R Street, but then also get kind of a more hands-on perspective. So Chief Stephen Castevens is, as I said, currently the police chief in Buffalo Grove, Illinois. And he's been in law enforcement for over 40 years, 46 years, and has served as chief in Buffalo Grove for the past 10 of those years. He's a past president of the Illinois Association of Police Chiefs, and a past president of the International Association of Chiefs of Police. For 17 years, he was also an adjunct instructor for Northwestern University's School of Police Staff and Command, where he taught traffic management and analysis, and he is a graduate also of the FBI National Academy and a past recipient of the J. Standard Baker Award, which is, for those not familiar, the highest award that you can get in the country, recognizing a lifetime achievement in highway safety. And then Vincent Balistreri is the co-owner and general manager of Niche Restaurant in Geneva, Illinois. He's been in the business for 25 years and at Niche for 15 of them. He is a part of the court of sommeliers and a cicerone, but most known actually for his whiskey endeavors. And he is on the curriculum board for Elgin Community College's culinary management program. And he has been featured in many publications, such as Wine Advocate, Wine Enthusiast, and Taste Magazine. So yeah, we definitely have a panel with a lot of experience in their respective areas today. So I think that's going to make for a great discussion. Without further ado, we will hop in here. I already see we got one question submitted, so appreciate that. And again, people are welcome to continue doing so. So just to kind of set the table for us here, pardon that pun, since we are talking about culinary topic, to-go and delivery alcohol, as probably most of you know on this call, was largely unheard of in pre-COVID America. One of the things that can often get confusing for some people that maybe don't study this topic all the time is that to-go alcohol and delivery shouldn't really be confused or conflated with what are known often as kind of open container zones or open container cities. So New Orleans is the most common example of this. People go down there, you see people walking in the streets with a drink. There's some other cities in the USA that have kind of these open beverage zones. The idea behind to-go and delivery, it can incorporate those if a city has passed, kind of an ordinance on that. But the idea generally is kind of with a takeout order, you get a drink and you bring that back home, or the restaurant or a third-party delivery service is bringing it to your home or place of business or wherever it might be that you're planning to kind of consume your meal and your drink. So I just wanted to flag that because people can get kind of confused in this area. So to be sure up front, why did to-go and delivery exist, and why did it come so quickly into existence during COVID? And just to be clear, it was obviously to help a lot of the small businesses, the bars, the restaurants, the liquor stores, distilleries, breweries, all the places that we like to go to and frequent. It was to be able to help them sustain their businesses during an unprecedented in our lifetime pandemic, which created things like stay-at-home orders and sheltering in place and restrictions on actually opening for a lot of these businesses. So it was an effort. A lot of these early emergency orders were an effort to allow them to sell alcoholic beverages alongside with food at many of these businesses. And it is incontrovertible that it helped them. It's been looked into by various different entities, and just as one example, states that permitted to-go and delivery drinks actually saw a higher rate of their furloughed employees being hired back during the pandemic. So it clearly had an effect on the bottom line, on the viability of these small businesses. And since COVID, it has continued to spread to-go and delivery models. As I mentioned, it was those emergency orders at first, but now more recently, we started to see legislation that's extending them, those privileges for a couple of years or making them permanent, perhaps. We at our street actually study kind of how many states have implemented different kinds of to-go and delivery rules for restaurants and bars, for example. Again, we also looked at it for off-premise locations like liquor stores or grocery stores, or from producers like distilleries. But all told, according to our calculations, 38 states have authorized to-go or delivery, at least from restaurants and bars, either permanently or through 2023. And 24 of those are permanent. And then again, the rest are extended for a period of a couple of years at least. And off-premise delivery, again, think of grocery stores, that also has continued to climb. It was higher. You're more able to kind of get beer in more places or wine in more places with your grocery order pre-COVID. But since COVID, it's continued to expand. And there's a lot of inside controversy in baseball in the industry about how you count how many states are allowing that type of off-premise delivery. But again, we found that depending on how you count it, it's up to 43 states. So that, I think all that shows there's a trend towards more and more states starting to adopt and bring on board rules and laws authorizing these different types of businesses to deliver or offer in a to-go capacity alcoholic beverages. Unsurprisingly, we live in a democracy, and so there's always kind of the yin to every yang, and so we have started to see some opposition that has begun to develop against to-go and delivery alcohol. And it comes from a concern around potential negative externalities or negative costs that could come with us allowing to-go and delivery alcohol. Really, some of the big focus has been on underage drinking. Could a high school student get easier access to alcohol based on to-go and delivery? That's something that we're actually studying right now at our street and are hoping to also produce some research on soon. And then another, of course, when we talk about alcohol, there's always the concern of the negative externality of drunk driving, right? We don't want people to be on the road impaired. And so trying to figure out, how or if to-go and delivery alcohol would impact things like underage drinking or drunk driving is really important. There's been a lot of concern around, a lot of kind of anecdotal concern or kind of worry amongst people that, in fact, to-go and delivery alcohol have maybe led to an increase in drunk driving or could do so. And since the pandemic started, there's of course, there's a lot of noise in this area. There's been a trend of kind of these splashy news headlines you'll see sometimes talking about how alcohol consumption increased during the pandemic. There's been reports about how drunk driving has escalated during the pandemic. And these definitely can be scary to read and concerning, but again, when in policy, it doesn't answer the question of whether to-go or delivery alcohol had anything to do with any of those trends that people are seeing. So again, that's kind of what we're going to answer today. Just briefly, I'm going to walk through a little bit of our research. I will put, or we can actually follow up at the after this event to you all, or if anyone's interested, they're certainly welcome to email us our actual report on looking at the empirical data of drunk driving and to-go cocktails, but I'm going to summarize that here for us quickly. To really answer whether to-go or delivery alcohol has impacted drunk driving, you need to have state-by-state breakdowns, right, of drunk driving data. Because what that does is that allows you to compare states that, for instance, have allowed to-go cocktails during COVID with states that prohibited them. And so providing kind of that controlled experiment to test the impact of what impact, if at all, there was from to-go and delivery alcoholic beverages on drunk driving rates. As anyone knows who's dug into drunk driving data, it's difficult to get consistent nationwide data on drunk driving that breaks down by state. But fortunately, NHTSA, or the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration, they do put out an annual report on traffic fatalities that has state level breakdowns. And one of that subsets in that is alcohol impaired driving fatalities. So that can show us, what traffic deaths involve the use of alcohol and how are those amount of deaths, those rates changing over time. And so sadly, again, there was, NHTSA did find an overall rise in alcohol-related traffic deaths in 2020, the first year of the pandemic. There's not been 2021 data released yet. That should be coming next year, probably. What gets interesting, though, again, is what we did at our series. We took that data and overlaid it with states that were allowing different forms of to-go and delivery versus those that were not allowing that during 2020. So again, that kind of gives us that controlled experiment to see, was there any difference between a state that was allowing these things and one that wasn't in terms of how many drunk driving deaths they were experiencing, in terms of how much of an increase they saw. And so what's interesting is when we actually did that, interestingly enough, the states that did not allow to-go cocktail from on-premise establishments like restaurants or bars, they actually saw a higher rise from 2019 to 2020, the first year of the pandemic, in the number of alcohol impaired traffic deaths they had than states that did allow to-go and delivery alcohol from bars and restaurants. Now, I want to be careful here and pause. It's very important to understand what this data does and does not tell us. It does not tell us that actually prohibiting to-go and delivery alcohol somehow causes more drunk driving deaths. We're limited to 50 states when we're doing analysis of America. And so it's really difficult with a sample size that big to ever kind of show any kind of causation like that. But at the very least, it does kind of prove an absence of that causation. It does prove that there is no correlation empirically. It really suggests that there isn't between to-go and delivery alcohol and that leading to a higher rate of drunk driving deaths. And we found that across all different types of businesses and delivery models. So again, from restaurants, from grocery stores and liquor stores. So I think I'll just end by saying we can go, if people have more questions, I'm obviously glad to answer them. People, again, are welcome to submit that. And we can certainly follow up with everyone on the call with the report and the data we've done. But this was really the first effort that's been done to kind of bring some empirical evidence and data to this conversation. Right now, it's largely existed in kind of anecdotes or kind of concerns and fears that people might have, but it's been absent of any kind of actual analysis on data. And that data is important for policymakers and for legislators around the country who are considering or recently implemented to-go or delivery alcohol reforms, to know that the data has shown that in 2020, there was no empirical evidence that to-go and delivery alcohol caused a spike in drunk driving rates. So that's the effort that we did. We're hoping to continue to work on this topic, continuing to study data as it comes in. Data lags a couple of years, right? So each year more and more will come online, and that'll be helpful for policy entities and policy researchers to study. So that's an overview of what we have done at R Street, of some of our findings at a high level. And as I kind of promised starting this off, I think it's also really important to be able to draw in people who are different stakeholders on this issue, and that's what we've done today. So I think I'll start first. Appreciate everyone bearing with me as I kind of laid that out there, but I think I'm going to start first with Chief Cass Stevens. And Chief, again, we've heard from various different interest groups throughout this about the possibility that to-go and delivery alcohol could cause a spike in drunk driving. But I just wanted to hear from your experience as a police chief, as a law enforcement officer in America, a stakeholder who's often not heard in this conversation, frankly. Could you kind of speak to this and tell us what you've seen kind of from your perspective and experience so far?
Sure, Jared, thanks. First of all, my entire 40+ year career in law enforcement has been involved in traffic and highway safety. So this is something I'm very passionate about. That being said, I'm also very passionate about data. And much like R Street, I look to data for the answer to the questions that are posed to me. And if you don't have data, then you're just another person with an opinion. And I prefer data. And so I look at some of the data that you put together, and I find it very interesting. And so before I delve into that a little bit, personally, and from my agency here, which is a suburb of Chicago, we have seen absolutely zero evidence that there is a nexus between to-go alcohol and alcohol-related traffic crashes or drunk driving. We have seen nothing. And what I found interesting about some of your study data is when you looked at all the 50 states and which ones allowed either delivery or to-go alcohol and which ones didn't. So you see some data of states that allow to-go alcohol, and then their alcohol-related fatalities went up. You see some of those same states that allowed it, and their fatalities went down. And conversely, I look at the states that prohibited to-go alcohol, and as you said, in some of those cases, their alcohol-related fatalities went up. So to make that leap, that there's somehow a connection between the two, I find is ludicrous, because the data just doesn't point there. So just because B followed A doesn't mean B was caused by A. And so that's what I look to. And I find no connection between that to-go alcohol and alcohol-related crashes. And what's I think important to remember also is there's a variety of reasons that we can point to that alcohol-related traffic fatalities or crashes increased during COVID. There's a ton of speculation on that. And again, no good data. There's speculation that, well, people don't go to work anymore. They're working from home. And so they found more time to go out and grab alcohol and drive. There were fewer people on the roadway. And so this I have experienced, the few cars that were on the roadway during COVID were driving really bad. I've never been passed by so many cars going to work doing over 100 miles per hour in my life. And so you found an increase in just general bad driving behavior, alcohol related being one of them. So we can speculate like crazy of why in some states the alcohol-related driving went up and driving went down. But to make that direct nexus between to-go alcohol, I just don't buy it.
Sorry, I had myself on mute there. Thank you, Chief Stevens. Yeah, and I imagine I don't know if law enforcement conferences are a thing, or how much you might connect to other sheriffs or chief of police around the country. Have you gotten a sense from anyone else about their concerns about this? Do they see this as something that they've witnessed some kind of an increase? Or stories of this or not? I'd just be curious. Maybe the answer is that you haven't had those conversations, but you're more likely to have than any of the rest of us. So.
Yeah, we actually have had those conversations, especially with the international chiefs of police and our experts on our highway safety committee, and where our conversations have typically gone, and this is in the past few years, is we have to remember that when you talk about impaired driving and even alcohol related crashes, remember that term, that's alcohol related. And what we're finding more often in law enforcement is polysubstance use of both alcohol and drugs, whether it's prescription drugs or illegal drugs. We're seeing that combination of substances. And so quite often you may have an alcohol-related crash, but it's not entirely to blame on alcohol because there's polysubstance use. So there may be one or two or multiple drugs also being used. And so that's really where we struggle. We're trying to find out what truly caused this crash, injury or fatality crash, and how much of it is alcohol and how much of it's something else.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. One question I have for you, and I think it's something we'll actually get into with Vincent a little bit from his perspective in a little later, is one of the focuses I think you would agree on to-go beverages or to-go cocktails, specifically talking about the mixed beverage category, right? And that's another thing maybe be helpful for those less familiar. I mean, there's different types, obviously, right, of to-go alcohol, just as there's different types of alcohol. You could get a 6-pack of beer from a restaurant. In some states, you can now buy a bottle of bourbon, for example, to go from the restaurant, a bottle of wine. Some states have allowed, just beer and wine to go, but not the actual mixed beverages with some kind of a distilled spirit, for example, in them. And so there's been a lot of focus on containers, right? And as you know, it's one thing, maybe some people have felt if something's in an original container, pressurized beer can, a sealed bottle of spirits versus some kind of a mixed beverage, which is made on premise of the restaurant, mixed up, and then, has to be put in some kind of container for that person to take home or to be delivered to that person's home. But, then on the other hand, though, I mean, we've had things like recorking kind of, wine bottles if you don't finish it all at a meal. I think most states now actually allow that, have those recorkage laws. So we have had similar things to this, but do you think there's any kind of discernible difference between those things? And if so, kind of what ways in which, or what ways could communities, restaurants explore to be able to address those concerns to the extent they might exist?
So during the pandemic, I talked to a variety of elected officials on this exact topic, and both state and local officials. And their concern was, oh, geez, if I go to Niche because I love that barrel-aged Manhattan there, and I can't make it like that at home, so I want one to go so I can take home with me. Oh, gee, well, what if somebody does that and they open it on their way home? It's so easy to do. Like, do you know how easy it is to open a can of beer or a bottle of beer? It's easier. For me, from my perspective, to say, well, one of the reasons we should prohibit cocktails to go is because it's so easy then for the driver or passenger to open those up. It's just as easy to open up a can of beer or a bottle of beer or a variety of other things that you can buy from the local liquor store, grocery store, 7-Eleven, whatever. I don't see, from that point of the concern, I don't see any difference. If somebody is going to do that, they're going to do that with whatever type of alcohol. So really what it comes down to is educating people as opposed to just prohibiting this.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, if we could have maybe more education in public policy, it would probably be less just outright prohibitions.
Absolutely.
Yeah. The story of alcohol, particularly, I guess, going back to prohibition itself. But yeah, well, that's great. I have some more questions. I'll come back to you on, Chief, but I'd like to bring in Vincent here. Vincent, first of all, I apologize. I come from a upper Midwest farm family, so niche was what we said in our household. Niche, I have heard as well. So I didn't mean to not use a fancy enough term for it. I apologize about that. But yeah, so can you tell us, Vincent, a little bit about how your restaurant used to go alcohol during the pandemic? What kind of innovations you all kind of put in place to be able to serve alcohol in the to-go format? What did that look like for you during those early months and then into the years we've been in this pandemic?
Well, thank you. Yeah, that the alcohol to go pretty much, well, I can safely say saved the restaurant. Not blowing it out of proportion, it truly did. We closed. We were told to close down for people coming inside. We're a finer dining establishment, so a lot of our food, you're not going to take a lot of our fish and stuff home. It doesn't travel well. So we were looking for things to do to stay afloat, keep our staff with us, make sure everyone has money. And we did, coming into the pandemic, we did have bottles to go. We had a license to sell closed containers of bourbon and wine. But that was not enough to stay afloat. We just had to get creative. We came up with Officer Cass Stevens brought up barrel-aged Manhattans. People really like those. So we bottled those up. We're selling them. We weren't making a ton of money on it, but every penny counted during that time. And then what really helped us and what we're fighting for again with our municipality is we came up with advent calendars where we could pour them into little 1 ounce mason jars every day of Advent. You open a different bourbon and you read about it in the book that we put together. And that truly saved the restaurant. A lot of local restaurants were told to close and did not. We were one of 4 in our city that actually did close. And without the liquor to go sales, Niche would not be here. And we've been here for 16 years now and are kind of a staple. So that law really helped. And that's why I'm trying to fight to keep it going.
Yeah, and I want to get to that conversation about keeping it going in a little bit. I think you brought up a good point. I did hear some stories from those in the restaurant industry in different states. There's rules and there's whether everyone's 100% following the guidance and the rules that are out there with the closures. We saw this a lot. So I think it's important to note that a lot of the restaurants like yours was trying to do the right thing and follow this guidance and make sure that you're obeying these public health orders, and kind of this world of uncertainty we were all thrown into were the ones that benefited most from these innovations, is providing that kind of legal authorized outlet to be able to continue operating during kind of an unprecedented time, instead of doing stuff that maybe they shouldn't have been. So I think that's really important to focus on there. Could you, Vincent, maybe just step back a little bit? I think it might be helpful for people to think about those that have kind of studied the restaurant industry, and again, the folks that I know and talk to, and have talked about the importance generally of alcohol sales, just generally in the terms of kind of the margins that they bring in the door. The restaurant industry is notoriously one of the most difficult industries, as you well know, to stay afloat in, to continue being at the top of your game in. And food margins are, from what I've heard, razor thin, and oftentimes it is a reliance on having a beverage program that makes those numbers work. Could you talk a little bit about that and kind of how important it is generally to operating a restaurant?
Well, for us specifically, yeah, we're not McDonald's. So, we're a smaller, I guess you would consider it mom and pop kind of place. We seat around like 70 people. Without alcohol, we would never open our doors. So yeah, like you said, the profit line with food to beverage, we when we run numbers, we look at to hit 38 to 40% of all sales the alcohol. Without that, we can't keep going. So with cutting that out, also we're dealing with right now with the inflation prices and stuff like that. So it's even harder on the food side. I mean, we just paid $3.50 for a cucumber. I looked at an invoice this morning. I was like, oh my God. So yeah, alcohol, it's really make or break for a lot of these places. So when we were shut down, that was huge. And I could go on and on. We talk about like the containers and all that stuff. We were just, I think the key part, and this is kind of going a little off topic and back to a previous topic, is we were lucky during that time that it was passed that we could do alcohol to go. So doing it properly instead of just making a Jack and Coke without a lid and people going in and out of the door, we didn't want to push that. We were happy and blessed that we could just do anything to get some more revenue in. But yeah, alcohol, I mean, for us specifically, and I can talk, I have a lot of friends in the industry. It's a massive part of the industry.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Again, I want to just quickly remind people they're welcome to submit some questions. We've already got a couple that I'll try to get to here, but again, just wanted to flag that for people. We always welcome that. Vincent, you alluded to this a little bit earlier, but I want to talk about it because now that we moved into this phase where states are considering making permanent to-go cocktails or have done so, or considering delivery alcohol for different types of businesses. I've heard some arguments of, well, this was helpful during the pandemic when we couldn't go to restaurants, but it is irrelevant now, essentially. There's really nothing that restaurants or bars are gaining anymore from this ability. You touched on this. I thought it was a very interesting thing kind of about these adult beverage kind of like advent calendars. As an example around the holidays, is it actually from what you were telling me, if I understand right, you kind of foresee continuing to be a worthwhile thing to be part of your business. So can you talk a little bit about kind of your view on what this looks like going forward and to the extent which you think it would still be helpful for you all?
Oh yeah, I think it will be very helpful. I know, I mean, there's still some restaurants coming out of this that they're still in debt. They're still trying to make ends meet. The advent calendar is very helpful. Again, and I've talked to you and Officer Cass Stevens too. The key is making sure that the container is a proper container and everything is being done correctly. I don't see how it affects, as Officer Cass Stevens said, what's the difference of buying a mini airplane bottle from a liquor store and cracking it. If the container is properly sealed, there shouldn't be a difference. It's bringing in more revenue. It's better for the city. It brings in taxes. It gives people an opportunity, especially with the advent calendars, to try all kinds of things that they might not always be able to try. People are drinking it in their home, which is a plus too, instead of drinking all that alcohol and then hopping into their car. And I also like what I'm hearing, most of the pushback I'm getting is from local liquor stores or big corporate liquor stores. They don't want any restaurants or anyone to dive into some of their profits. I don't see this going as like a major cash cow for any restaurant. I don't see like a complete change of a restaurant's plan. I think it's just something that helps out and offers customers things they might not even be able to get. There's rare whiskeys like Pappy Van Winkle. I can pour a 1 ounce Pappy Van Winkle instead of buying a whole bottle, put a nice sealant on it, and it's a present for someone. The key again is just making sure restaurants know and having the proper sealants for these.
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, if you've got Pappy Van Winkle, we may all come over there after this. But yeah, I think that's a really important point that can get lost. To what extent would there be a substitute effect, so to speak, between different entities in the alcohol space? And I think it's important to point out what you just did is that the person that's going to buy or wants kind of the barrel aged Manhattan alongside their to-go hamburger, that's not really a competitor in really any way to a store that might be selling someone, some tequila for their weekend get together where they're going to be mixing margaritas at home. So I think that's important to keep in perspective. It's one of those things that you really kind of need to break down what are different consumers going to different businesses to be able to do. And so, yeah, a lot of people can't find a bottle of Pappy Van Winkle liquor store. If they can't afford it. So having some other outlet to be able to buy that is kind of tends to help everyone, as they say, a rising tide raising all ships. I want to now get back a little bit to the container issue. I would like to get kind of both of your perspectives on this from the law enforcement side and from the restaurant side. So this is an interesting one, and maybe we can kind of unpack some of the things to think about, at least around this. I've heard both sides of this and everything in between. There's been a new restaurateur in New York who invested quite heavily in glass bottles and screw caps to, really make sure that, these things were sealed well. And then with 1 day's warning, I think it was in New York, they said that To-Go Cocktail Authority was going away. So he had, it was tens of thousands of dollars of overhead. That was essentially a sunk cost labeling for all this stuff that was gone. New York has since, for those who have followed the saga there, continued it, but I don't know if he's even going to be able to use those anymore. There was a period of not being able to. So there's obviously the concern on overburdening the restaurateur side of this. There's also the legitimate safety concerns we want to have, where it's not just so, kind of to your example, Vincent, just like pouring in a plastic glass, like a Jack and Coke or something for someone. So what's the balance? I'm going to start with you, Chief. What would you be advising other law enforcement entities or policymakers that are thinking about this topic? We'll come back to you, Vincent, after this. But Chief, how would you kind of, what things would you at least tell them to be thinking about? I don't think we can probably answer this whole question today and write a model legislation, but what are the types of things to be thinking about?
Well, you bring up some good points. First of all, we have to be consistent. Not only in our state and in our individual municipalities, but we really need consistency across the nation. We need to fall somewhere between, the Key West of here's your drink and off you go, with no seal on it whatsoever. And, do we want to get back to the point where, all right, if you're going to do cocktails to go, you have to have a tax stamp sealing over it or something. Somewhere in between there lies common sense. And I think that's where we have to go. Vince probably knows better than me with the industry of, what the best practices would be for cocktails to go. But my concern in law enforcement, like anything else, is just we need to be consistent. We need to agree upon the standards, and let's just be consistent so everybody's playing by the same rules. Otherwise, City X, a Chicago suburb, makes their own local rules, and 2 suburbs over, they have different rules. Well, that's just not fair to the industry.
Yeah, Vincent, what have you guys done, first of all, for how that just be, I think, of interest to people? How have you guys packaged your cocktails? What are some of the things that you've taken into account with this?
Oh, well, it was kind of on the fly, like when we found out, and we talked to our local municipality as well as the health inspector and everyone, and it was somewhat up in the air just from all the chaoticness that was happening. What we tried was, so we used in Illinois and other states, you can, for like, we were talking about the wine to go. If they drink half the bottle, cork it, put it in the bag. We use those bags a lot, as well as tape around the closed container. Again, we weren't doing like Jack and Cokes to go. We're not a college town or anything like that. It's a residential, pretty well behaved city. And so we did that. We've tried using the plastic, like kind of cellophane sealant over it, but again, on the fly, it didn't work as well. It was kind of, we're not properly trained on it. It was kind of loose. So we'd have the plastic sealant and I just put tape over it again. Don't crack it. Put the receipt in the bag with whatever they bought, saying they bought X, Y, and Z. And like Mr. Officer Cass even said, it's using common sense. It's easy for us, like where I'm at, but I also come from in my youth when I bartended at a nightclub in Arizona, college towns and stuff. That's where it can get like a little iffy. Not to stereotype a certain area, but like those would really be more of my concern. Places like us and other areas, as long as I don't know where they're going to go with as far as how to like conceal tops and everything like that, but some sort of practice has to be done with sealing it, because if a police officer does pull you over and there's no seal over it, what do you do?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And so what I'm hearing in this is I think that there's a real place here, opportunity, which again can be all too rare in the public policy field, is to bring in the various people that are part of this conversation. Chief Cass Stevens, some representatives from the restaurant industry, some people that are actually working in the regulatory chair at the municipality or at the state level, to figure out kind of what is the intersection of practicality and what you all are trained in and not trained in. You're not running a bottling line at a restaurant. That's impractical. But also, how can those safety concerns be addressed? So I think that I'm heartened to hear that your municipality is at least having some of those conversations. I think that that's something that's been missing a little bit in this. State legislators were trying to write the stuff on the fly, and a lot of them are amateurs too. A lot of state legislatures are part-time, and a lot of them don't have experience. Unfortunately, most of them tend to be attorneys like myself, and so they maybe don't have some of the real world experience. So I think that's what's the critical piece there. That can be missing. Really quickly, and then we'll get to some audience questions. And again, we have a couple more now, so I'll try to get to what we have, y'all. But feel free to keep submitting. I want to talk quickly just about Illinois specifically. As one of the things I thought would be really unique about having this panel with you both there. But again, you're different, a little bit different areas, and so one of the things that Illinois has been somewhat known for, and alcohol space, and maybe in other spaces, there's other states that can be like this. Maryland's an example, have quite a bit of local control over how alcohol can be regulated. Some of these states are able to kind of just pass this like one size fits all thing at the state level, and that kind of just green lights restaurants to be able to do it. Some states kind of will authorize the localities, the municipalities to decide whether they want it. So Vincent, can you quickly just chat? It sounds like you're kind of going through this process, figuring out whether you're going to be able to continue to do this with your municipality. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. So, like you said, most things in Illinois get passed by state, and then the state passes it on to local municipalities. So this came up, I wasn't really aware of it, but that when it came up to pass, to keep it going, Illinois passed it, sent it to where I'm at in Geneva, and they just said, no, let's get rid of it. I think a lot of it had to do because our restaurateurs did not know. So when it came up to like, oh, are we going to be able to do our advent calendars again, which is a really good chunk of business for us. They're like, well, now that you brought it up, I guess we can bring it up to the board again, blah, 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 called the mayor, et cetera, et cetera. So we're going into it hopefully in early November. It takes a long time to put these together, and hopefully it passes. because I mean, we're putting in thousands of dollars, kind of praying that it passes. And then, yeah, so we're waiting to see. There's, I don't know. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm just
Yeah.
hoping.
Yeah, and how difficult does that make it for you, Chief, with your officers to know what the hell's going on? Basically, if someone starts driving through Geneva from somewhere else. Yeah.
Therein lies the problem of why I'm stressing consistency. So in Illinois, a lot of municipalities, their mayor or their village president is also the liquor commissioner. And so those decisions are made on a local basis. Well, you've got hundreds of suburbs around Chicago. So if 25 of them allow it and the other ones don't, that means somebody in a suburb, 2 suburbs away from Buffalo Grove, where I work, still allow cocktails to go, but that person is driving through Buffalo Grove and we don't allow it. So that becomes a problem again in consistency. So now it's, well, you didn't buy it in Buffalo Grove, so you didn't violate our village ordinance. But now we look back to the state law. Are you violating an open container law? Which again goes back to the importance of consistency.
Yeah, no, that's very helpful. Yeah. Well, I want to try to get to a couple of audience queries, and I think we'll have even time for some more. If people have a particularly piercing one, feel free. But one thing that was actually flagged helpfully from someone watching is that some kind of state level restaurant associations have been kind of emphasizing some kind of a rule of tamper evident kind of containers. I think that's helpful to flag. To me, that strikes me as a relatively, simple, again, without having to get into all the details of writing the model legislation right now. It's kind of a rule of reason that people could kind of point to. Chief, what would you think about something like that? I would imagine it might be able to allow a law enforcement officer. I've always been on the other side of traffic stops. I've never been on that side of it, but I imagine that would at least be some kind of a thing to be able to look at for an officer in kind of a quick setting like that. What do you think?
Well, I would point to the recreational cannabis industry that's coming across our country very quickly in the last few years. And there's been a lot of rulemaking involved there. And well, you can't have open containers of cannabis in your car. So the containers that you transport it with have to be tamper proof. It has to be evident somehow. Yeah, that just makes sense. So do we go back to, like I say, the old fashioned tax strip that, went over the top of a bottle of alcohol, and you could tell if that strip was torn, the bottle was open, something to that effect, but just something that's both evident that it's been tampered with, but at the same time, not overly burdensome to the industry, that they're not spending thousands of dollars to buy, whatever equipment that's required to make their containers evident, tamper-proof.
Sure. Yeah. Vincent, what do you think about that? I mean, in some ways, it's kind of what some of the system you were, again, on the fly with the best you had, whether it's tape or other things to kind of denote that, putting that receipt in there, being like, this is what was purchased. And maybe, the more that regulators and law enforcement officers have clarity about what the rules are, it's very easy for them to see, well, what was this, is that matching with what I'm seeing here, for example, in a car. So I just wanted your quick reaction on that.
I completely agree with that. Like I said, going into it, it's kind of a blessing that this happened. So I think it makes things easier for everyone if there is a specific way to do it. I really like the idea of the tax strip going over it, as long as everyone is doing it correctly. Again, too, it could also be something that helps local municipality. You add an extra $100 for a specific license if you want to do it. That's not going to devastate any restaurant. That's going to bring in revenue. I think there has to be a little, I wouldn't say like stricter, but better guidelines of how this should go going forward. Like Officer Cass-Stevens said, going into, you're driving from one suburb into another. There has to be better guidelines, or more people need to know of these guidelines going forward to do it. But yeah, I completely agree with everything that Officer Cass-Stevens said.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's great. We had a question asking whether the data compared states that had shutdowns for restaurants. It's another thing, of course, we saw that I alluded to early on, versus those that did and didn't, and what impact that might have had. We didn't directly study just that, but I just wanted to mention for those that are interested. I mean, obviously, if a restaurant wasn't allowed to operate, it wasn't able, of course, to sell to go either. So I think some of that could have been captured. It was most states, from my recollection, it wasn't, and there's exceptions to this, I understand. It's 50 states, a lot of different trends across the country during the pandemic, but a lot of the strict actual closures weren't for a huge amount of time. So it might be a little bit difficult to gather much data. So one of the things we did is to qualify as a state that we counted as a state that was allowing to go in delivery. It had to be for at least 5 months out of 2020. And the pandemic didn't really start till March. So it really had to be for a good chunk of time. Some states, might have authorized it for a month. It's like, oh, that data is not going to tell us very much. And so that's just something to keep in mind when we're studying this. I think it would be a little bit difficult to do a really robust analysis of just the closure issue. Now, you could do kind of capacity, for example, like, what restaurants allowing, or what states are allowing how much capacity inside restaurants. But that's a good question. I just wanted to flag for folks. We also had another one that was asking about the impact. Is a little off topic to the go thing, but the impact of service hours on drunk driving rates. Another issue that's I'm sure able to bring out some strong opinions on either side. Kind of last call is kind of a jargony way of saying it. And I don't know, my understanding, and I think I would have seen this, is that's never been systematically studied in an empirical fashion across all 50 states. Last call hours are very interesting. One of the funny things is some of the places you think would have the latest last call hours do not, and they will actually have midnight ones. The question asked, about 4 a.m. I'm not familiar with very many places that go that late. You'll see 2 a.m. sometimes as a last call. It tends to be, the majority I've seen have been between midnight and 2 a.m. And I think, again, it's much more likely that it's not the hours necessarily, it's the environment and maybe some other cultural factors. So I think that you could have a renowned college party town that has last call at 12 that may have some more issues on enforcement than a sleepy suburban neighborhood that happens to have a 2 a.m. last call law that's been on the books for 30 years. And may or may not be used very much. That's kind of been another thing people have looked at as happy hour restrictions. So example, states like Massachusetts have their infamous happy hour ban. You're not allowed to have happy hour, but even some of their neighboring states actually have historically had less drunk driving rates than Boston. So I think the access issue, all of this falls under access, right? To go delivery, last call, discounts falls under the access issue. It often, in my experience, has been other factors at play, but I just wanted to quickly in our time here, just toss that over to the chief and just kind of see if he broadly thinks that makes sense.
Yeah, the issue there, typically when we have a problem establishment that has late hours like that, it's not the hours, it's the training and of the bartenders and the alcohol servers. Are they BASIC trained? And do they put that training to use? Do they understand when they have to cut somebody off and tell them they can't be served anymore? That's really what it comes down to. It's not, you can't just point, as you said, and say, well, if you stay open till 2, 3, 4 a.m., that's a problem. In some areas, it's not. The problem comes into, are the alcohol servers trained? And then are they using that training appropriately to tell somebody, you know, it's time to go. And by the way, it's time for you to call a ride share.
Yeah, yeah, right. Yeah, and that's another important thing to bring into mind is the different kinds of we're really at a historic high of alternatives to driving home. That's a real blessing with ride sharing. So that's something that we didn't get into today. And then the last thing, two things. Another very knowledgeable commenter. We have a good audience today. Talked about in Kansas, there's a requirement for a tamper-proof packaging and bag, and the sales receipt actually is placed in a transparent bag that's visible without even opening it. So that's an interesting idea. Just throw out there. I think the more we can use our states as laboratories of democracy here, it'd be kind of the better. The last thing I mentioned on the drunk driving thing that can be lost in this is that delivery, some of this is picking up the drink at the restaurant, but a big portion of this is also delivery, whether that's from the restaurant employees or from a third-party delivery service. And that could have a role again in actually reducing drunk driving when you think about it, getting the alcohol to people and instead of them doing something harmful with it potentially. So yeah, I appreciate everyone tuning in today. Thank you again to Chief Cass-Stevens and to Vincent. We always enjoy these topics and discussions. I always promise people they won't go longer than an hour, so I want to adhere to that for sure. But again, this will be recorded. It will be put up online on the R Street website, our YouTube channel, for folks that want to share it with other people that weren't able to attend today. And we'll also include some links, hopefully, on some of our research as well. So thank you all again very much for coming in. I will hope to see you all again, not really, but in the stratosphere, the visual internet stratosphere again at our street event. So thank you all very much, and thanks to our panelists. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.